Hello there, I'm the Marvel Master, and I'm here with my first video of Act 2 of my Marvel Movie Universe, or MMU for short. So far, I've gone over how a Spider-Man trilogy and a Fantastic Four trilogy would play out, and all you need to know for this video is that a character named Bobby Drake would have been one of Peter Parker's classmates before mysteriously vanishing one day. And without further ado, onto the video. Though first, I should probably explain what this thing behind me is. It's a template for all of the movies in Act 2 of the MMU, and as the video progresses, I will be revealing the X-Men movies and you'll see where in Act 2 they would take place. As an example, here is the template for Act 1, with all of the movies I have covered so far revealed. The first movie in the X-Men trilogy would be titled Welcome to Murder World, and would be set around the same time as the first Spider-Man movie. As you've probably come to tell, the order of movies in the acts doesn't always show where they land in the timeline, but I'm going to try my hardest to have the movies in general order, unless they are directly set in the past or tie into a previous movie, like this one. The movie would open with Bobby Drake saying goodbye to Gwen Stacy after school, and going home. While in his room, it'd be revealed that he has discovered he's got ice powers, as he turns his arm to ice or something in the evening. Later that night, he would awake to find himself being basically kidnapped by a bunch of cyborgs. He would be being dragged out of the house and onto the porch, and would start to panic, uncontrollably spraying ice from his hands, until one of the cyborgs, who are called the Reavers, would slap a collar onto him, and it would click into place and disable his powers. At that point, there would be a red flash, and the Reaver holding Bobby would be thrown back by a burst of force. Bobby would turn to see a bunch of guys and a gal in their early 20s, dressed in prototype X-Men costumes. The group would consist of the first class of Cyclops Scott Summers, Marvel Girl Jean Grey, Angel Warren Worthington III, and Beast Hank McCoy, who would neither be blue nor hairy. They would start to fight the Reavers, but would get overwhelmed once the cyborgs got over being surprised. That would be until Professor X comes down and out of the Blackbird, the X-Men jet which is parked down the street, and he telepathically freezes all of the Reavers, ordering his students to get back into the jet. Beast would pick up a very confused Bobby and would bring him with them. While in the jet, Beast would help disable the collar, and Professor X would explain to Bobby that at birth or in their teens, some people develop powers or physical abnormalities due to a gene called the X gene, and that they are called mutants. Charles says that he has a school for young mutants just discovering their powers, and that he's been planning to directly or officially invite Bobby and ask his parents, but he sensed that Bobby was in danger, while using a device called Cerebro he uses to track mutants. They would all arrive at the X mansion and Bobby would be shown to a room. He would try to sneak out a few hours later, but Scott would be waiting in the opening hall and would tell Bobby a bit about himself and his power, and how his parents and brother died in a plane crash. Scott would basically say it's Bobby's choice if he stays or goes, but Scott would recommend staying, especially as the school is a safe place. In the morning, Bobby, who would have decided on the codename Iceman, would be taken on a tour of a facility by Beast and Professor X. This would involve seeing Cyclops, Marvel Girl and Angel doing a training session in the Danger Room against simulations of the mutant villain Pyro, and we would see a bit of Jean Grey's telekinesis, as well as Warren's aerial acrobatics, and the group would successfully take down the flaming villain. Iceman would be asked if he wanted to demonstrate his powers, and he'd unsurely say yes, only to get thrashed by a simulation of Avalanche, who can create seismic shockwaves, which the Danger Room would simulate by actually making the floor move up and down. At one point, Bobby would be thrown into the air, and Warren would look like he wanted to help, but Professor X would basically say no. Bobby would stretch out his hands and create an ice slide beneath him, which he'd slide down on and be very proud of being able to do it, only to be knocked out by a blast of rubble sent flying at him by Avalanche. leading to him waking up in the med room. After apologising for the danger room being a bit unstable and saying that he's planning on updating it, Beast would show Bobby something that fell out of his pocket, a small orb that is flashing, and Bobby would say that he doesn't know what it is. An alarm would blare, and it would be revealed that the Reavers are attacking the school. Cyclops says it shouldn't be possible, but Beast would realise that the device was a tracker. Long story short, Professor X and the student would get gassed and captured. The students would awake and find themselves in total darkness, but all of a sudden, carnival music would start to play, and lights would flicker on to reveal that they are in a large room painted matte black, but with a door with loads of neon arrows pointing towards it, and a flashing sign saying "Welcome to Murder World" above it. There would be a crackle, and the group would turn to see a TV in the upper corner of the room. A ginger man, grinning maniacally, would introduce himself as Arcade, and would say that he is the one who brought them there. Arcade would say that they have to work their way through the maze in 2 hours if they want to save themselves and Professor X, who he would show them is in the same room as him, tied to a chair and unconscious. Arcade would say that if they made it to the centre in time, they'd be allowed to go free, but if they didn't, then he'd be forced to hand them over to the person who hired him. Arcade would disappear and would be replaced by a timer, and Scott, who would not have been happy with what Arcade was saying, would blast the TV, pulverizing it to smithereens. The team would progress through the maze, avoiding traps and eventually ending up at a place called the Roller Coaster of Doom, and on this, Cyclops and Jean would be separated from the others, as their cart would be sent down another track. At one point, Angel, Iceman and Beast would be attacked by Colossus and Nightcrawler, the latter of which is wielding a cutlass, and seemingly can't teleport. During the fight, as Angel is just swooping down and about to surprise Nightcrawler, the corridor would shift and the Metal, Mutant and Blue Demon would be separated from the X-Men. Jean and Scott would get separated in a hall of mirrors and then reunited as the two came out and started to walk down the corridor, only for a second Scott to rush out after them, and a second timer, much shorter than the overall one, as well as the text, "Find the real boy," would appear on a nearby screen, accompanied by a ticking noise. It would have been covered earlier that Jean has telepathy as well as telekinesis, but that she is not that good at the telepathy side of things, especially not with the constant tick-tock and the time pressure. Both Scotts would answer questions the right way, and should finally find out the real one, which is the one who'd rushed out afterwards, by telling them to look at each other and then using her telekinesis to pull off their visors. Red Force would rush out the eyes of one, and it would slam into the other, sending it flying back and into the wall, causing the fake Scott to collapse and spark. Jean and Scott would come across Nightcrawler and Colossus and would be told to fight them, but Jean would see something in the eyes of the others, telling her that they don't want to fight. She would say that she doesn't want to fight them either, and they would be surprised, saying that their friends, as in the other X-Men, didn't feel that way earlier. Scott would figure out that the Colossus and Nightcrawler, who they are with, must have faced duplicates of their allies, and would show them the robot version of him. We'd learned that they both woke up there with no idea what to do, and were told that they had to work together as a team to find the way out. We would also learn that Colossus had come to America after his government tried to force him to join his military, and that Nightcrawler was part of a travelling circus, and had the ability to teleport to anywhere that he could see. Angel, Iceman and Beast would face some more traps, such as a giant robotic spider that shoots webs, and Iceman would manage to do some things such as blocking off corridors, and then, when that didn't work, channeling all of his energy into blasting the spider, and encasing it in ice, and in doing that, he would turn to ice as well, though he would find he has the ability to turn back to human form. Soon after this, Angel, Iceman and Beast would reunite with the others, and would start to fight Colossus and Nightcrawler, before Jean stepped in to explain that they had probably fought robot duplicates of them. Arcade would be angry at this and would cut half an hour off of the timer, giving them only 10 minutes to spare. Charles would wake up and send a telepathic message to Jean marking his location in her head, before Arcade knocked him out with a spray of gas. Jean would lead the team of mutants towards the location, ignoring flashing warning signs and avoiding attacks from the maze and the Reavers who Arcade has sent after the young adults. Most of the team would stay behind to fight the cyborgs, but Jean would be sent onwards along with Kurt and Scott, as Scott could use his blast to knock down sections of walls, and Kurt could use his teleporting to help check for and disable traps. Eventually they would reach a steel door and Jean would say that Professor X is just on the other side, but the door would be locked with no seeming way to get into, like no keypad or anything, and Arcade would laugh maniacally as the timer enters its last 10 seconds. Jean would tell Kurt to take her hand and teleport into the room. He would say that he couldn't, but she'd say to trust her, and the time would go 3, 2, 1. In a flash, Nightcrawler would teleport himself and Jean inside the room, and Jean would stretch out her hand and send Arcade smashing into his control panel with a telekinetic wave of force. She would free Xavier as Nightcrawler found a way to open the door and let Cyclops in. Beast would have found a control panel in a patch of exposed wall after Colossus threw a Reaver into it and would be fiddling with it, while Colossus, Angel and Iceman fought the Reavers. And with a yell of delight, Hank would activate a button that would send a blast of electricity into a corridor that the heroes, working as a team because teamwork, had managed to basically force the Reavers into. The heroes would all reunite in the control room when all of a sudden alarms would blare and all of the doors would be closed and reinforced, even though Arcade is unconscious, or at least lying on the floor extremely dazed with a bleeding nose. A series of nanites would pour from the control panel, well, the main control panel, not the thing Beast was fiddling with earlier, and they would take the form of a girl. She would be Danger and would be the manifestation of the Danger Room, who was angry at the X-Men, Professor X in particular, for forcing her to work, though admittedly they did have no idea she was sentient, but she would say that that's no excuse, and that she tried to communicate with them as much as possible, but that she couldn't take on a human form or get across what she needed to say with the current technology of the Danger Room. I'd probably leave how much Professor X knew a bit ambiguous. Beast would realise with horror that this is why the Danger Room had been acting strangely, and he would try to apologise to her to no avail, because even when she had tried to create faces or things like that, he would have thought it was just bugging out and would have tried to reprogram it. Danger would then start to activate various traps such as cages dropping from the ceiling or blasts of electricity, just like the ones that Beast had managed to use on the Reavers, and these would all be happening at an alarming rate, and Danger would be saying that she'd have her revenge when she captures the X-Men and finds a way to use her nanites to puppet them, just like they did to her. A now conscious Arcade would say that that wasn't part of the deal, and would start to rush to the control panel and begin typing in some code, before Danger blasts him with some nanites and traps him against the wall. The X-Men would be dodging traps and nanite blasts from Danger, but she would capture them one by one until Bobby was the only one free. He would manage to freeze Danger, and as the lights in her eyes flickered and went dim, all of the cages would swing open as the doors unlocked, and the main doors for the control room would also unlock. Bobby would shed a single frozen tear. Beast would say that they can restore her with her code, and find a way to let her exist happily and independently, only for Arcade, whose nanite bonds had been released when Bobby managed to completely freeze Danger's physical form, to execute his program and delete all of Danger's code. Cyclops would knock Arcade away as Beast leapt to the computer and started to type furiously as Danger's code is managing to put up quite a fight, even as Arcade's program tries to delete it. Jean would say that she can feel danger and that she's getting weaker. Beast would type a quick command and a chip would eject out of the computer, just as Jean says that danger's gone, and the X-Men hold a minute of silence for her. Kurt would ask Beast if he managed to save her, and Beast would say that he didn't know. Professor X, carried by Colossus, would mind control Arcade to lead them to the exit, and after a long journey up a long tunnel, they would emerge from a maintenance shed at Coney Island, with all of the lights in the park blaring, and all of the noises of the crowd around them. Professor X would release Arcade from his control, and the madman would start laughing maniacally as the X-Men and their new members left him there to be dealt with by security. The mid-credit scene would have Beast, who seems to be partway through his mutation into becoming blue and hairy, insert a memory stick into a computer in the danger room and type a command in before asking if anyone is there. Nothing would happen for a second until a robotic male voice would say, "Hello, I am Danger 2, and I understand you." Beast would smile. The post-credit scene would have Arcade playing cards in a prison yard. It'd be poker or something like that, and when revealing his hand, he would reveal an ace of diamonds. This tease, if you understand it, will not be followed up on in this video, but will be in a future video. And it relates to who had hired Arcade to capture the X-Men and the other mutants in the first place. I admit this movie maybe wasn't my best work, but it was harder to fit everything that I wanted to fit into the movie than I thought it was going to be. But anyway, I hope you liked it. And the next movie might be one of my favourite ones I've made. While the first movie used lesser known characters such as the Reavers, Danger and Arcade, the second movie, well, it's called Enter the Brotherhood, which basically tells you everything you need to know. Enter the Brotherhood would be set a few months after the first movie, and would open at the X-Mansion, where all of the mutants, including Nightcrawler and Colossus, who would have stayed with them after Model World, are living. While the first movie was in a way getting them all together, this movie more greatly allows them to shine as a team. Everyone would be going about their daily activities, with Colossus doing some painting, Jean in the danger room with the physical manifestation of Danger 2, who is chatting to her as he controls everything. Iceman will be playing basketball with Scott, Warren and Kurt, and Hank, who is now fully blue and hairy, would be in his lab while Professor X watches the students who are outside through a window in his office with a smile on his face. Through talks and stuff, it would be revealed that Cyclops and Marvel Girl are dating and that it's been going on a while. A TV would be on in Beast's lab, and it would say how after various mutant attacks, such as by the unstoppable Juggernaut, I know it's not technically a mutant, but everyone in the public in this universe thinks he is, and various mutant gangs around the country, the government has started a program called the Sentinel Program, headed by a man called Bolivar Trask, to quell the mutant threat. The Sentinels would be designed with the ability to identify mutants and deploy countermeasures in order to help subdue them. This would be broadcast worldwide, and we would see various mutant characters watching it, from Moira McTaggart to Sunfire, to a character named Guardian who's a part of the Canadian mutant team Alpha Flight, to Callisto and the Morlocks in the sewers. None of these characters would be named, and would basically just be there for the fans, but also to show that it is a global effect. Beast would tell Professor X, and we would see everyone gathering in the headmaster's office. Charles would say that it's outrageous, but that they must not act out against the government, and that he will go with a close friend to try and speak to the president. After this, we'd see a very different group of people watching the broadcast from a large living room. Magneto, in his full garb, would turn to the other people in the room. Toad would be sitting on a long dining table, picking grapes from a fruit bowl. Mastermind would be flicking through a newspaper in an armchair. Scarlet Witch would be on a sofa, and Quicksilver would be standing next to her, bouncing on the balls of his feet, a determined look on his face. Magneto would say that it's unacceptable, and that the time to act is now, so they should all get ready as they shall reveal themselves to the world the next day. Speaking of the next day, on said day, Professor X and Moira McTaggart would arrive at the White House to have a meeting with the president, but to their dismay, Bolivar Trask is part of the meeting as well. They get into their usual discussion of mutants are just like everyone else, so why have a specific force just for them, and why shouldn't Sentinels be used to help with human criminals and stuff, versus any mutant could be deadly, blah blah blah. When Professor X brings up that some can't control their powers, and that they develop them unexpectedly, Trask says that that's why they need to identify them all first, and that the Sentinels can help them do that. Back at the X-Mansion, Iceman would be having a talk with Nightcrawler about visual mutations, as Bobby can turn his on and off, so he can be in society easily. Nightcrawler would say that while at times he wished he was like everybody else, he is as God made him, and that he would not change who he is. He would also point out that if he didn't look like that, he never would have ended up at Xavier's school, and met all of them, the closest thing he's had to a family. Also, quick note, Nightcrawler and Marvel Girl's teleportation and telepathy would have greatly improved respectively between movies. Speaking of Jean, she would ask Colossus about his home life, as he hadn't talked about it much. He would ask why she didn't just read his mind, and she would say that it wouldn't be right without permission. Piotr would say that she is allowed in, and she would touch his shoulder and get a series of memories, including Piotr pulling a plough on a farm, a non-metal Piotr at school, Piotr at a family dinner, and lots of memories of him playing with a young blonde girl. Jean would let go with a tear in her eye, as she feels overwhelming sadness, and would ask if that's his sister. He would say yes, and she would ask why he hasn't gone back to her if he misses her so much. Colossus would say that he wouldn't want her to be in danger, and that staying away from her is what's best. Jean would ask if she's a mutant, and Colossus would say that he doesn't know, or at least that she didn't have powers while he was with her, but that she hadn't gotten to the age where most mutants develop their powers. Again, everyone would be summoned by an announcement on TV, but this would be by Magneto from the island nation of Santo Marco, which has a fairly substantial mutant population. He would announce that he and his Brotherhood of Mutants have taken over and have declared the nation as a sovereign mutant nation, from which he will wage war on the human race. Plus, he would introduce the members of his Brotherhood. Most of the X-Men would have no idea who Magneto was, but Beast would know, and would say that Eric Lenscher was an old friend of Charles, and that they both wanted to help save mutant kind. But while Charles wanted peace and coexistence, and founded the school, Eric believed that the only way that mutants could be safe and free was through mutant rule and sovereignty. We would cut back to Santo Marco and find out that the Brotherhood are in the President's mansion, and that Mastermind and Scarlet Witch had basically been using their mental powers to make the Brotherhood be ignored or forgotten by everyone there. And we would also learn that some of the mutants on the island see Magneto as their savior and protector, while the humans there are being forced to leave or be imprisoned. Mastermind would chastise Magneto about declaring all-out war immediately, and would say that that wasn't what was agreed, but Magneto would say that he agreed Mastermind could be there, as long as he didn't interfere with his plans, before saying that he has matters to attend to, and then he would ask Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver to come with him. Magneto would lead the twins to the master bedroom, where he would reveal to them that he is their father. Quicksilver would be outraged about Eric abandoning them, but Scarlet Witch would just be shocked. Magneto would say that he had loved them and their mother, but that one day he had arrived back at their house from a long journey, to find that it was burned down, and he assumed that the villagers had somehow learned that he was a mutant and had killed his family. Wanda would reveal that they had been told that they'd been adopted and found on the doorstep with the burned and frozen body of their mother coiled around them protectively. Pietro would tell Wanda that they should leave, and would tell Magneto that he hated him, but Wanda would see the sadness in Eric's eyes, and would tell Pietro that they should stay, at least for a bit, as they want mutants to be safe just as much as their father does. Charles would phone the X-Men to tell them that he needs to stay at the White House, but that they should take the Blackbird to Santa Marco and try and stop Magneto before he can do anything rash, other than declaring war on the world, but anything else rash, which would prove Bolivar Trask right. As the Blackbird was flying towards Santa Marco, they would be attacked by a swarm of Sentinels, who would have also been flying to the island, but while half of the Sentinels continued towards the sovereign mutant nation, the other half would peel away to try and take down the Blackbird, which Angel in his new suit would be piloting, and which would have all of the X-Men in. As well as being generally massive and having the classic design from the 90s show, or something similar, these Sentinels would be able to fly and shoot lasers, which they would do at the Blackbird. One of the wings would get shot and the plane would start to teeter in the air, but Jean would use her telekinesis to try and keep it together. Nightcrawler would spot a small patch of land and say that he might be able to teleport them all to it if Jean can levitate them down and protect them with a force field. Everyone would get in a circle and touch hands, but at the last second, Angel, who would still be seated and flying the plane, would pull his hand away. Everyone else would teleport outside and Jean would encase them all in a bubble and would start to levitate them towards the island, though it would take a lot of concentration. Scott would be shouting at Kurt to go get Angel, but over the intercom on their wrist bracelets, Warren would say that the only chance they have of survival is if the Sentinels still have something to chase. Scott would say that that's not fair, and would again tell Kurt to go, but Kurt, who would have been exhausted from teleporting everyone, as I said, he's better, but doesn't mean he's perfect with his abilities. Kurt would say that the Blackbird's too far away, and that it's moving too fast for him to be able to reliably get into it. As he guessed, or as Angel guessed, the Sentinels would sense that there was a mutant in the jet, so would follow it and continue their assault. As the X-Men touched down on the small patch of land, they would see the Blackbird take multiple hits and explode as it crashed down into the ocean. Cyclops would scream in fury and unleash a massive beam of force at the ocean, which, unfortunately, two of the Sentinels that had shot down the Blackbird would notice, and they would fly back towards the group of young mutants. With nowhere to go, the X-Men would prepare to stand their ground, but all of a sudden the sky would darken, and lightning and water spouts would start to form as a figure dashes through the air over the X-Men's heads and towards the oncoming Sentinels, before using said lightning and water spouts to take them out. Storm has arrived. This would not be Storm's first appearance, and we would have seen her in a movie before this, where she would have met Professor X in a post-credit scene. "Who are you?" Beast would ask. "I am Aurora Monroe," Storm would say, "mistress of the elements and mutant goddess, but you may call me Storm." "Thanks for saving us," Bobby says, "but what are you doing here? I saw your government's despicable announcement, and your leader Charles asked for my assistance. I'd already decided to come and help you, and he contacted me to tell me where I could find you." They would talk for a bit more before Storm would use her aerokinesis to basically fly all of them to Santo Marco. They would expect to see the Sentinels bombarding the mansion where Magneto and the Brotherhood are, but instead would see them hovering around it as if on guard. Magneto would be making another broadcast, saying how foolish it was to send machines made of metal to take down the Master of Magnetism, and would threaten to use the Sentinels as missiles to attack the USA if they did not surrender. The X-Men would rush to the mansion where they would say that they are there to stop Magneto. He would recognize them as Charles's students, and say that he does not wish to hurt them, but he will if they do not join him. This would basically lead to a fight between the Sentinels and the X-Men, and when the X-Men defeated the Sentinels, the Brotherhood would emerge and begin to combat them. At one point, Jean would try to hurl Colossus at Magneto as a weapon, but he would catch Colossus, who's literally made of metal, in midair and send him flying away. Marvel Girl would then try a mental assault, but would find that something is blocking her abilities. Storm would be in a battle with Scarlet Witch, and they would be at a bit of an impasse. Aurora would be sending bolts of lightning, but Wanda would be using her probability hexes to make them miss her. When Wanda uses her telekinesis to throw something at Storm, she would just deflect it with air or strike it with lightning. Quicksilver would be dueling Nightcrawler, fists on swords with both zipping all around the battlefield. Beast and Iceman would be in the middle of a field of masterminds, and would be attacking them only to find themselves hitting air or fighting a different non-existent force. Cyclops would be attempting to blast Toad, who'd be dodging his attacks, and would lash out his tongue and wrap it around Cyclops' legs, before hurling him into a wall, only for Cyclops to then hit him with a big blast and knock him backwards, into the real mastermind, who would lose concentration, making his duplicates disappear. As Beast took out the real Jason Wingard, Bobby Drake would turn and spray ice on a patch of ground, which Quicksilver would slip on and go careening into the heap, which has Toad and Mastermind in, and Nightcrawler would teleport just behind Wanda, slashing the back of her leg slightly with one of his swords, and kicking her in the head, sending her tumbling to the ground. The heroes would all rush to attack Magneto, but with a flick of his wrist they would all become encased in metal, and Magneto would call them fools and traitors for interfering. Storm's eyes would start to glow white, and clouds would gather, but Magneto would ask if it's really a good idea to send in a lightning bolt where all of her friends are bound in metal, or something along those lines. And yes, this is a reference to the first X-Men movie, with that scene in the Statue of Liberty. I kind of wanted to have Storm strike Toad with lightning, but I ultimately decided against it. At that point, Professor X would arrive with Moira McTaggart. They would have gotten to the island in a helicopter flown by Moira's fiancé, Sean Cassidy, aka Banshee. Charles would tell Eric to let his students go and to surrender. Eric would ask why, as he is protected from Professor X's telepathy. Xavier would say that he is proving the government right and giving them a reason to fear mutants, but Eric would reply, saying that they should be feared, not noticing the long slimy tongue rising up behind him. Toad, being controlled by Jean, would pull off Magneto's helmet, allowing Professor X to get into his brain and temporarily shut it down. The X-Men would all be released and fall to the ground, but Jean would slow their fall. Quicksilver would have recovered enough to go pick up his sister and zoom away, and Mastermind would have disappeared as well. As Magneto and Toad were sent to a specialist prison, we would hear the President of the USA thanking Professor X for what he and his students have done. I would say that they were maybe too hasty with the Sentinel program, and that they are sorry for the loss of his student. The movie would end with Angel's funeral, and Cyclops would be standing with Jean. He would be fingering a small red velvety box, but would slip it back into his pocket, as he knows that it's not the right time for anything like that. The mid-credit scene would see a man in rags shuffling through the rain on a street before stopping outside a terraced house. He would go up the stairs, open the door, and step inside to a lavish entrance hall, transforming into his usual form of Jason Wingard, aka Mastermind. A butler would take his coat and he would walk into a large living room with a fire flickering on one wall. An unseen man would be sitting in an armchair with his back to Mastermind facing the fire, and when Jason says that there's much to discuss, we would see the man's hand move and pick up a piece from a chessboard on a table next to him, a black king to be precise. The post-credit scene would see Professor X sleeping in bed, but he would begin to twitch as a woman's voice calls out to him, calling for help or to try and get his attention. His eyes would shoot open, and he would say Lilandra, and we would cut to black. So to end the second movie, we had two of my favourite types of post-credit scene, the shadowy man in a chair, and then someone waking up from a disturbing dream. If you have any better ideas for how those could have played out, please put them in the comments below. While the Mastermind mid-credit scene won't be picked up in this video, the post-credit scene with Charles will, as the third and final movie in the Act 2 X-Men trilogy is X-Men Imperium. It would open with a plane flying over Alaska with alarms blaring. There'd be a man, a pregnant woman, and two young kids on it, and the woman would be holding the younger kid, while the man was putting a parachute on the older kid, who's about 10 years old. The father would then essentially throw his elder son out of the plane before turning to go help his wife and other child, but as we saw the older child parachute down, the plane would explode above him and we would cut to the title card. Back in modern day, Charles would be wearing Cerebro in Beast's lab, and Beast would be running some diagnostic tests on him, before saying that his dreams are telepathic messages coming from beyond Earth. He would ask if he should get into contact with any of his friends at NASA, but Charles would say that he wants to keep it quiet, but also wants to know why this mysterious Lilandra is contacting him. He's been getting calls for help and blurry glimpses of a foreign world, as well as clearer ones of an avian woman in a prison cell. One night he wheels himself onto the lawn and sees something descending. Suddenly, a spotlight shines down on him and he raises his hands to shield his eyes as three figures descend. The X-Men wake up disturbed by the light. They leave the mansion still in pajamas in some cases, to see the three figures flying and loading an unconscious Professor X into some sort of spaceship. The three figures are an avian woman with long claws for nails, purple wings under her arms, and various cybernetic enhancements, a caped muscular figure with a mohawk and glowing red eyes, and a guy who seems to have a flaming skull for a head, whose entire body is flickering with fire. This last one would be the one currently holding Professor X. When the X-Men ask what they are doing, the caped one, Gladiator, would say that His Imperial Magistrax Ken of the Shi'ar has decreed for Charles Xavier of Earth to be brought to him for contact with a traitor, and this would lead the X-Men to instantly start to combat them. Both sides would fight well, but since the Imperial Guard, as those are who the kidnappers are, only need to get away, and the X-Men are half asleep or just can't fly or do much and such, the X-Men would not be able to win. I'm going to say as well that some people, such as Bobby, Aurora, and Kurt, aren't there, or weren't alerted in time, and arrived shortly after the Imperial Guard leave, so it would have just been Marvel Girl, Cyclops, Beast, and Colossus. The only important part of the fight would be Cyclops shooting an optic blast at the back of the flaming guy, only for it to split in two and bend around him, before both halves curve back and slam into Scott, distracting Jean, who was managing to free his Deathbird, the flying purple lady, with her telekinesis. Beast would basically explain to everyone about Charles's dreams and would explain that Charles had been getting him to modify the new Blackbird to allow for space travel, which Bobby would be really excited about, though Storm would not seem as happy about it. They would all take off in the Blackbird and head to space and would transition to see what is happening to Charles. Professor X would be thrown into a cell by Gladiator, his wheelchair gone and his hands bound in silver gauntlets that are attached together. The only other person in the room would be the lady he's been having visions of, Lilandra. He would ask what's going on, and she would basically explain the customs and history of her people, the Shi'ar. The Shi'ar control one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, rivaled only by the Kree, and they integrate other planets and races into their empire by marrying into them. Lilandra is the rightful ruler of Chandilar, the main planet of the Shi'ar, but she was overthrown by her mad brother Ken and their bloodthirsty sister Deathbird, as while Lilandra wanted to grow the empire, she wanted to do it peacefully and allow planets to choose whether or not they wanted to join, while Ken and Deathbird wanted to do it the old-fashioned way of invading planets and then forcefully marrying them into the empire. Charles asks why she sent him messages, and she explains that some Shi'ar have the ability to communicate telepathically, and that she had basically been sending out calls for help, and her mind had locked onto a powerful telepathic signal from a planet she had never heard of called Earth, and that she'd found him as a result of it. Charles would realise that she may have accidentally locked onto Cerebro, which amplifies telepathy, and that with him and Jean being around it so much, and using it most days, it may have become a beacon of sorts. Xavier would also say that his gauntlet seemed to be stopping his telepathy, and he would ask why Lilandra does not have them. She would say that while she is a prisoner, she is still a member of the royal family, and of the Shi'ar, and it's considered a crime punishable by death to use those on members of her own race. She would apologise for getting Xavier into this mess, and he would say that it's okay and that he is mostly worried about his students. Speaking of the X-Men, we would see them on the Blackbird, and there would maybe be one or two meaningful conversations between pairs of characters, as Beast attempts to follow where he picked up Xavier's dream signal was coming from, only for the Blackbird to be caught in a tractor beam and boarded by a band of space pirates called the Starjammers, involving the feline Mamzelle, the amphibious Ch'od, the fierce Raza, the robot Waldo, and their leader, a man who calls himself Corsair. He would board last, but would call for his crew to stop fighting when he saw Cyclops. As you may have guessed, the boy who escaped the plane at the start of the movie was Scott Summers, as that was mentioned in Welcome to Murderworld, and this spacefaring pirate Corsair would be his father. It would be revealed that the plane was actually shot at by a Shi'ar scout ship, collecting samples from other planets, and before the plane exploded, the Shi'ar on the ship, led by Deken in fact, had teleported Scott's parents and brother onto their ship. An escape attempt would see Mr. Summers and the pregnant Mrs. Summers successfully ejecting Alex back towards Earth in an escape pod before being captured and separated. Christopher Summers, Corsair, would tell Scott that he was told his wife and unborn child were killed and he was sent to work as a slave in the mines, where he met the rest of the now Starjammers, and they all escaped together. The Starjammers would agree to take the X-Men to Chandelier so they can rescue Professor X and maybe help take down Deken. Corsair would remember Lilandra as being the best member of the royal family, and would want her reinstated on the throne. Speaking of the throne, Lilandra and Xavier would be summoned by Deken to his throne room. Behind his throne, embedded in the wall, is a large magenta crystal pulsing with light called the M'Krong crystal. Deathbird, Gladiator, and Starbolt would be there as well, as some normal Shi'ar guards and some of the Shi'ar senators, some of whom are not that happy about Deken being the Magistrax. Deken would ask Xavier about his planet, and Charles would say that it's a peaceful planet who have barely touched the stars, and are of no threat to the Shi'ar. Lilandra tried to cut him off, but Deathbird would grab her and put her hand over her mouth. Deken, having already known all of this from when he went there in Cyclops' backstory, would laugh and say to the senators that since Earth is so primitive, there's no use assimilating it into their empire, and because it's full of traitors, then it'd be a perfect planet to test the power of the M'Krong crystal on. Lilandra would wrestle out of Deathbird's grip and say that he can't use the M'Krong crystal, and that it's supposed to be locked up in the vault as the power inside is too deadly and would kill anyone who tried to use it. Deken would say he is strong enough to harness its power, and that he wouldn't need to risk it anyway, as he's built a device capable of using the energy of a crystal without releasing the force trapped inside. Deken would then send them back to their cell and promise to allow them to watch the destruction of Earth on the morning of their execution day. By the way, on the walk up from the cell to the throne room, Xavier would have seen how beautiful the cities and surface of the planet are. And by walk, I do mean walk, as to get to and from the throne room. In this case, the Shi'ar would have given Xavier basically a suit to help him walk. Soon, the Starjammers and X-Men would arrive, but the Starjammers would turn on the X-Men, and it would be revealed that the Starjammers had sold the X-Men out to collect a massive reward, and in exchange for no longer being fugitives. Corsair had no idea that his crew had done this, but doesn't interfere when the X-Men are subdued and put in handcuffs that block their abilities. It would come to the day for the execution of Lilandra and Professor X, and they would be led outside to a platform where crowds are gathered looking at them. Behind them on the platform would be a massive contraption, shaped like basically a giant gun or cannon, with the M'Krong crystal in the center. The Imperial Guard and Starjammers would be standing nearby, but Corsair would slip away and go free the X-Men, apologizing to Scott profusely as he does so. The X-Men and Corsair would all rush to the courtyard where Deken has told his people to start preparing the cannon for destroying Earth, and the X-Men, again with Corsair, would start to fight the Imperial Guard and the rest of the Starjammers to try and stop the machine, and also free Xavier and Lilandra. At one point in the fight, Starbolt's helmet would be knocked off, revealing that he is a human boy in his late teens, and Cyclops and Corsair would immediately see the family resemblance, and realize that he is the third Summers boy, Gabriel, who Mrs. Summers was pregnant with, and who was supposedly killed with her. At another point, the machine would be broken somehow and would partially collapse or start to power down, and to stop this, Ken would rush forwards to steady the Mcron crystal or stop it from falling. Throughout the movie, we've only seen it be moved by robotic equipment, and it's revealed why. As soon as his hands touch the crystal, which was cracked slightly in the destruction, 5e energy emerges from the cracks and begins to swirl around Ken and go inside of him. He grins maniacally as his eyes glow pure orange, and says that he should have done this the whole time, and that with the power he now has, he'll be able to destroy anything that stands in his way, starting with the X-Men. He'd begin to turn on them, but everyone would notice that his body is flaking slightly, and cracks are starting to form on his skin. Lilandra, who was with Charles, and had been freed by Beast, would say that he was going to explode with enough force to destroy the entire planet. The Imperial Guard would realize that this is true and would turn on Ken, for Gladiator to save the planet, for Deathbird to save herself, and for Starbolt to save his newly found family. But the Mad King would send them flying back with a wave of fiery energy, though Gabriel would not be as affected. We would see some of the energy go into him, and he would look down as some of it lingered and swirled around his fingers before being absorbed into his skin. He would start to slowly advance towards Ken and would begin to absorb the energy from the madman and draw it into himself. At the same time, Mamzelle of the Starjammers, regretting the fact that she and the rest of them had essentially betrayed Corsair, would sneak up behind Ken with a Shi'ar spear. Scott would be shouting at his brother to stop, as even he can't contain that much energy, but Gabriel Summers would deflect any attacks thrown at him, and would continue to absorb the deadly force. Mamzelle would impale Ken from behind, causing his body to explode in a large burst of energy that basically fries her and sends the rest of the destructive force flying into Gabriel all at once. Panic starts to build on his face as he realizes too late that Scott was right and that he won't be able to contain it all. But at the last second, Jean would thrust out her hand and would take control of Gabriel's mind, forcing him to send all of the fiery energy into the only target she can think of, herself. Scott would scream no, but Jean would not explode and not even die. Instead, the energy would just get sucked into her and disappear, and she'd collapse, unconscious and slightly steaming, but otherwise fine. Mamzelle wouldn't have been so lucky and would die in Corsair's arms, apologizing for what she had done. Lilandra would thank the X-Men for what they had done and would offer Charles to stay to be her husband, but he would decline, saying that his students and his planet need him, and that he doesn't think they should expand to the cosmos just yet. Gabriel Summers would be joining Corsair to travel across space, and Corsair would ask if Scott wanted to come, but, like Charles, Scott would say that he has a new family now, but would tell his father and brother not to be strangers, and to visit him sometime. The current Imperial Guard would be disbanded, with Deathbird being sent to jail for helping in the coup, and Gladiator essentially self-exiling himself for the choices he made. The rest of the Starjammers would stay on Chandelar, and would become the new Imperial Guard until replacements are found. On the way home, Jean would regain consciousness, and as they are slowly flying back towards Earth, Scott would lead her to a window that points to the sun, and would propose to her, and should immediately accept. As the Blackbird re-entered the atmosphere, there would be a significant amount of turbulence, and Jean would have to use her telekinesis to hold the ship together, and direct it to land in a water source, Jamaica Bay in fact. Everyone else would jump out, and Cyclops would have to be thrown telekinetically out by Jean because he'd refused to leave, with it being too similar to what happened to his family, even though they did actually survive for the most part. The X-Men would all be floundering/treading water near where the Blackbird crashed, when Jean, in a whole new costume, would fly up in the iconic pose and would exclaim, "Hear me, X-Men, no longer am I the woman you knew. I am fire and life incarnate. Now and forever, I am Phoenix." Cut to black. The post-credit scene would see workers and machines basically fishing the remains of the Blackbird out of Jamaica Bay, a crane would drop a piece of wreckage, and a small black bit of sludge would fall off it and begin to slowly squiggle its way towards the city. Quite a wild post-credit scene, yes, but it was the only way I could really tie it into Act 3 given that, spoiler alert, we won't be getting another X-Men movie for a while. At least not an X-Men movie with X-Men in the title. The next video in this series will go over the final movie of Act 1, and its related movie in Act 2, and I will reveal now that they are an Invaders movie and a Black Panther movie, so hypothesize with that information what you will. After that, I'll make a video on the remaining 3 Act 2 movies, before moving on to Act 3, and past that, who knows? Well, I do, at least I have some rough plans. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and a like, comment, subscribe, a share, or maybe just some hyping would be greatly appreciated. Have a good day, and ta-ta.